Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Magedhi Rudrayate Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Several thousand years ago, an incident is mentioned in one of the Upanishads where a disciple approaches his teacher and asks the question, what is it knowing which everything will be known? And that's kind of question that can come to the minds of those who have a desire to know a lot of things, and then we discover there is so much to be known and so little time, so little energy. And if it were possible to get one knowledge by which everything would be known, then that would make it very easy. After all, we do nowadays have one master key that can open all the keys, all the locks at a home. Or with increasing online accounts and passwords, sometimes you have password managers, and all that you need to know is one password by which then you have access to all your online accounts. Exactly in the same way, is it possible to know one thing by which everything can be known? Seeking after knowledge seems to be inbuilt into the human mind. We can see that right from the eyes of a little baby. As the baby looks here and there, and you see that inquisitiveness. And while at that age, besides the sounds and sights and colors, there is not much that we can take in. As we grow older, these sounds then begin to make sense. We are able to get some language skills. We are able to form words, understand concepts, and our ability to learn increases, but also a knowledge that there is so much to be learned. Swami Vivekananda once said, learning is religion. Joseph and MacLeod, his friend and disciple, used to say that Swamiji learned every day. Something new he learned every day. And I think that's a good yardstick for all of us. If at the end of the day, if we can look at our day's activities and ask ourselves, have I learned anything new today? It doesn't have to be something earth-shattering. It could be something as trivial or as small as how to peel a piece of ginger. That's what I learned this time when I was in Santa Barbara. I was peeling ginger and I was using a regular peeler, and I was showed that, well, you don't have to do it. You could just use a spoon so that you don't scrape off more than what's necessary. So it could be as simple as that. But if at the end of the day we find that we have learned something new, then that day is not wasted. As we look at our life and then find out among the things that we have learned, how much of our learning was conscious and how much of our learning was unconscious. It's interesting to take a few cases. For instance, if you have acquired some skill, whether it's learning some musical instrument or even science or whatever skill that you have, it's sometimes useful to say, how did my process of learning that skill begin? Obviously, when we started, we knew nothing about it. Then gradually, slowly we learn. So, how did all this begin? How did I learn all this? Is a very useful practice. Same thing with regard to Vedanta. Many of us here are students of Vedanta. So, for many of us, it's not too difficult to find out that how did Vedanta, for instance, enter into my life? How did my interest in spiritual life begin? Was it through books? Was it through meeting with some spiritual seekers? And how did that interest grow? And how has it changed me? Sometimes it's a very useful exercise to take a look at this. And then we can ask ourselves, if someone were to approach you now and then say, hey, you have been going to the Vedanta Society, I would like to learn Vedanta. What would you recommend that person? Books? If you would like to recommend them books, what kind of books would you ask them to read? Was it scriptures, lives of saints, their teachings? All of these questions bring us back to the basic question that what does learning really involve? What does it mean to learn something? And how much of the learning but look at it this way, how many of the things that we have learned came as a result of the advice that we received from our elders or from our teachers, and how much of the learning that came but just through observation? And sometimes we will see that it's not so much what our parents or teachers told us when we were young that we remember, but more about what we saw them doing. It's often so sometimes it is said, a lot of learning is caught rather than taught. And a lot of it is therefore very unconscious. So if knowledge is what occurs after learning, it's also important to then ask, what is knowledge? What does knowledge really mean? Swami Vivekananda once said, if I have to begin my education all over again, I would not read any books at all. He said, I would first train my mind. Some of you might remember this incident. I think it probably occurred in Northern California, when Swamiji once said, I feel like taking this intellect of mine and throwing it into the Pacific Ocean. And one of the women present there, she said, but Swami, your intellect is what we love about you. And then Swamiji said, ma'am, that's because you are a fool, just as I am. So obviously in spiritual life, there's something more than simply the intellect. And that's what Swamiji meant, that first we need to train the mind before that mind can be filled with contents. And we are also aware of the other teaching of Swamiji, that education is not simply the amount of information that is put into our heads and runs riot there all through life. It's only that the ideas and information that we have, if all those ideas kind of fit well, if we know how things are connected properly in our mental picture, and only then that leads to knowledge. Otherwise, too much of information is actually too much of confusion. And therefore, it's helpful to see that there are two kinds of knowledge. One kind of knowledge is obviously theoretical knowledge, the knowledge that comes through reading of books, through attending lectures, classes, retreats, discussions with friends, all of these things which gives us a lot of ideas, a lot of information, bring knowledge, but that's a very cerebral knowledge. All of it gets stored here. Now, the second kind of knowledge is the empirical knowledge, a knowledge that comes through experience. Now, ideally, the two should keep in step, that they should go hand in hand. But that's not what's happening today, and that's the major problem in our process of learning. If we go back historically, very ancient times, even before there was printing or before there was paper, the disadvantage in very olden times was there was no easy accessibility to knowledge. There were no books to be got. There was no Google, obviously. So if you want to learn something, then you had to go to a teacher's place. And then basically, your teacher was your only source of knowledge. And if the teacher was good, then the teacher would assess where you stood, give you an appropriate lesson at that stage of your evolution, and then ask you to practice. Then once you practice that, in fact, in the Vedic form of education, the very first lesson that the teacher gave was giving of that Gayatri mantra, the prayer, one of the most sacred prayers in the Vedic literature. And that prayer is essentially a prayer for the awakening of this power of intuition, the power of understanding. The last part of that prayer, Dhiyo Yonaf Prachodayat, really means, may our Dhi, our awakened understanding, guide us. So the idea was, if my heart and mind becomes clear enough, refined enough, then no matter where I will put that mind, I'll be able to grasp the essence, not just of information, but the knowledge, the capacity to squeeze knowledge out of information. That's what leads to wisdom. And so what the teachers did in the olden days was that they first gave a lesson, and then they said, now practice it according to it. When the student practiced, so first you were given a theoretical lesson, then the student was asked to practice. As a result of practicing it, some amount of experiential knowledge came. Based on that experiential knowledge then the teacher gave the second lesson, by which time you had acquired a little bit more refinement of the mind to understand the next lesson. And then you practiced it again, and then the next lesson, and then again. So both of these went together. Now, come back to our own times. After printing came, and books, and proliferation of books, and the internet, now the advantage of the times in which we live is that knowledge, or at least information, is easily available. If you know how to use a computer, you don't need to even go and buy books. And just go on the internet, and then you find whatever it is. The easy accessibility of knowledge, of information, has been a blessing, but also in some ways a curse. In the sense that sometimes you will have noticed, just because it's so easy now to get answers to the questions that we have, we don't feel the need to remember it. So if there's something that you're looking for, all that you need to do is just go Google or whichever search engine you use, put the word, get the answer, and then you know that next time you would want to know the same answer again, you can get it very quickly. Your mind would refuse to keep it in your mind. So you will forget it as quickly as you got it. On the other hand, in earlier days, I'm not talking about now very prehistoric days, but even before the internet, for instance, if you wanted to know something, then you would have to go to the library, search for the book, take the book out, turn pages. So there's some amount of labor involved, some amount of investment of your time and energy was there. And people tended to remember things more when they had invested some time and labor into it. So that's been one disadvantage. The easy availability of information makes it easy for us to forget them also. But there's another greater danger, and that is we now have a lot more information, but not a sufficiently capable mind to process that information. And so, rather than the information that we get, the ideas that we get nourishing us, they in fact produce indigestion. It's like this. When we eat, nowadays we are so careful about, most of us, very careful, become health conscious, we careful about what we eat. We know what agrees with us, what doesn't agree with us. And we just eat what we are able to digest, which is great, which is nice. But are we exercising same care about the food that we give our mind? Because the ideas and the information that we put inside the brain is also a food for that mind. And if that mind is not able to digest it, not able to process it, then that's a mental indigestion is actually more difficult to get rid of than just a physical indigestion. And that's the problem. that we are somewhat careless in what we allow the mind to consume. Unless, of course, you're kind of a Harry Potter fan or things like that, it's not so easy to kind of pluck things out of your head and throw it out. So if you put in some rotten idea inside, you're stuck with it. You can't do anything about it. And so sometimes it's good to recognize one thing we can do right away. As they say, if you find yourself in a hole, first thing to do is stop digging. So if really not, we need to eventually take care of the junk that's in our head. But right now, the first thing that we can do is at least make sure that we don't throw more rubbish there. So we can exercise care in what kind of sensory data we allow to go inside our heads. And so what are the things that we can do about it? One thing is, as I said, being judicious about our reading. What kind of books that we read. Again, just reading too many books doesn't necessarily make us knowledgeable or scholars. This one of the incidents I often mention. It happened a year or two after I joined the order. One of the first duties I had was to look after the bookshop in our monastery in Bombay. And so there was this one gentleman who used to come and buy books every week. And after a few weeks I got curious, because every Sunday he would come and buy a bunch of books, and I was curious whether he was really reading them. So I asked him, I said, "You've been buying all these books, do you really read them?" And then he was a very sincere, really frank and honest person, and he said, "Maharaj, when I first started buying books, it was with the intention of reading them. Then over time I found, no, I'm not able to do it. So I've decided in this life I'll just buy books. I'll just read them and read them in my next life." So it doesn't matter. So it's not just about the number of books that we read. We have to be really very careful. Theophan the Recluse. This is from one of the volumes from the Philokalia called The Art of Prayer. So this great mystic, Theophan the Recluse, this is what he suggests. In the question of reading, we should bear in mind the principal aim of our life and choose those things which accord with it. Then something will result that is integrated, coherent, and therefore strong. This solidity of knowledge and conviction will give strength also to our character as a whole. So even if we read just a few books, but absorb them and see what resonates with our head and heart, and if there is something that makes sense, we try to live according to those great teachings, that will be more beneficial than just reading a whole lot of books. There's another great danger in indiscriminately reading a lot of books, and it is this. Words and the way words are employed is very tricky. So, and especially in spiritual literature, you'll find some words kind of occurring across traditions, whether it's like consciousness or spirit or soul. These kind of words come again and again and again. Now, if you are a voracious reader, and then you read some book from, say, Tibetan Buddhism and Vedanta and Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and some of these words may be very common in them. The mistake we are likely to make, if we are not careful, is to not recognize that although the same word may be used, it may not have been used in the same sense. So the word consciousness can occur in one place, it can occur in 10 different places, but each one of those authors may be meaning something very different. And that's what really creates a lot of confusion. And so even when we read books from traditions other than our own native tradition, we have to be careful just to see, not just kind of get hung up on the words themselves, but also see in what sense those words are used. One of the things that has become more common in the increasingly diverse societies in which we live is kind of syncretistic living. By syncretism I mean, because things are now easily accessible, we tend to pick and choose whatever we like from a variety of different traditions. In itself, great idea. So you read a few books on Buddhism and you like this and you say, okay, this is something I can do. And from Vedanta, this is something I can do. From Islam, this is something I can do. And then you kind of put it all together. There's one problem with it, and it is this. Practices in different traditions are based on the metaphysic of that tradition, the worldview of every tradition. And if we are going to just pick up few selected things from different things, we will have to make sure that when we put it all together in a little bowl and mixture of our own, that they are well integrated. It's a little bit like this. For instance, say there are 10 different ingredients. In themselves, each of those ingredients is great. Say you're cooking some dish and you pick up 10 different things because you love each of those things. And then you say, well, I love each of those things. If I can put all of those things together, I'll have a super dish. Probably may not be. Maybe those things together may not gel together, may not integrate. The result may be terrible. Although each of those items may be great in themselves. Now, I mention this to emphasize that even when we do a reading, a vast reading, it's helpful, there's no doubt about it. But also, when we then try to integrate those practices or those ideas or those teachings in our own personal practice, we may have to kind of customize them, or it will fit them into our own worldview, so that the result is a wholesome, nutritious mixture, not a kind of a jumble of things. There's another one quote from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. Some of you are aware that during Swami Vivekananda's wandering days, he just carried only 2 books with him. One was the Gita and the other was The Imitation of Christ. Please take a look at that book if you haven't. So this is what Thomas A. Kempis says is that, if you desire to reap profit, read with humility, simplicity, and faithfulness. Do not ever desire the estimation of learning. Inquire willingly and hear with silence the words of the holy. Dislike not the parables of the elders, for they are not recounted without cause. This is, again, in any process of learning, we have to be very careful. If we are not careful, it's so easy to become proud of what we know. So again, before we undertake any reading, we need to ask ourselves, why am I reading this book? Because sometimes kind of read something new and then you are in the company of the friends, it's so tempting to just then impress them. It's like, oh, I know, I read it in this book. And then, so we need to ask, how much of the study that I do is, what is the main purpose? What is the main motivation behind my study? Is it to impress my friends, or is it to kind of be recognized as some very knowledgeable, scholarly person? Or is it truly to acquire knowledge? The Sanskrit word for a student is vidyarthi. It's a combination of 2 terms, vidya plus arthi. Vidya is knowledge. Arthi means one who wants. So, etymologically, if you go to the literal meaning of the term student in Sanskrit, it means one who wants knowledge. But normally we tend to use the word student to whoever goes to school. Now, does everyone who go to school want knowledge? Again, you can ask people who go to school, are you there for knowledge, or are you there to get a degree? Well, if you're there for a degree, then you are a degree arthi, not a vidya arthi. You see, so a true student will be one who wants knowledge. And that's what, and especially for spiritual seekers, if we see ourselves as devotees, as spiritual seekers, then we have to be even more careful. That when I read these books, what is the motivation behind reading it? Not just because, well, everyone's reading it, or the Swami asked me to read it, so I'm reading it. But again, what is it? What do I hope to get from this book? I think this kind of self-questioning is very important. Swami Vivekananda once said, what the world wants today is 20 men and women who can dare to stand in the street yonder and say that they possess nothing but God. Who will go? Why should one fear? If this is true, what else could matter? If it is not true, what do our lives matter? And I think that's important also. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that one of the most central practices is harmonizing our thoughts, words, and actions. In fact, the major cause of stress, anxiety, and worry in our life is that these three are not in harmony. That what we think and there's a big gap between what we think and what we say, and then what we say and what we actually do. If these three things go in three different directions, then obviously there is going to be stress, there is going to be strain. And to the extent we are able to bring our thoughts, words, and actions in harmony, then we can experience inner harmony, and depending on how much inner harmony we have, we will acquire the ability to live in harmony with the world outside, with the people with which we live. We will be able to retain our own sanity and calmness even when people around us are losing theirs. Sometimes we tend to blame the environment or the community for our own troubles. But what, if anything, Vedanta teaches us is that, and there is that poem Swami Vivekananda wrote, "No one but me to blame," is to take responsibility for our own state of mind, for our own actions. That no matter what the world outside is doing, no matter what the people around me are doing, I should be strong enough to be able to hold on to my own principles, my own values, and not be affected. If anything, the one form of service that we can do, and this is important, a lot of time when we speak about service, the very first thing that comes to mind is, of course, Doctors Without Borders, people going in distressed areas and helping people in need, and obviously that is service. And there's a lot of service is needed because there is so much suffering in the world in which we live today, no doubt about it. But some other kind of subtle form of service goes unrecognized. And it is this, that if you can truly live in peace, in complete peace and silence, then you become a powerhouse of that peace. Then even people around you, you don't have to go on preaching the value of the value of peace or anything. You just have to be yourself. If we are just our own peaceful, holy self, just by being who we are, we're already doing a lot of service. And sometimes we may be serving others without our even knowing it, and even others knowing it that they are being served. There's this story that's often told about the author W.H. Auden. Apparently, once he was so distressed that he wanted to commit suicide. And I think it was in New York probably, and if I remember right, probably the Brooklyn Bridge or something. So apparently he said, somewhere past midnight, determined to end his life, he walked to the bridge, he got up onto the, what do you call that? railing, and I was about to jump. Just then, because it was so late, there was no one on the road, one huge truck passed by. And then there's this truck driver. He was just whistling and singing joyfully all alone. He had the long drive ahead, and he was just going. And the truck driver didn't even know what was happening. But this Auden, he says that just as he was about to jump, he heard this truck go by and this joyful singing of this driver. And so he paused. He paused, and then he suddenly said to himself, "What am I doing? There is joy in this world. There are things to live for." And he said he quietly stepped down, returned home, and never again thought of taking his own life. And then later on, he wrote this. He said that truck driver would never have known that he has saved a life. All that driver was doing was, he was happy with just expressing his happiness. And unconsciously, he had already done a lot of service. Now, that's the kind of service I said goes often unrecognized. So if we can remain peaceful, contented, cheerful, just our own peaceful, cheerful presence may lift some depressed soul, may bring some cheer in someone who is very sad. And no one may come to thank you for it. It doesn't matter, but you're already helped. And the reverse is also true. Just as service can be unconscious, disservice can be unconscious also. That is, if I'm very angry and mad, and if I go out into the world, someone who may be happy by looking at me, that person's happiness will go away, and that person will come. So I've really done disservice to the world. Swami Vivekananda says that he said, in some days you feel miserable, you feel sad, you feel depressed, don't go out. He said, you have no right to spread this disease into the world. He said, just keep it to yourself. So this is just a kind of a little detour on what I was saying, but I think this idea of service needs to be recognized. And I came to this while saying that there has to be harmony between our thoughts, our words, and our actions. There's one thing that we learn from the teachings of Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji, and the direct disciples, is that religion is not simply a matter of just reading books or just believing in something or just acknowledging something. It's not a matter of belief at all. Therefore, again and again we read, religion is realization. It is experience that lives forever, because it's experience that brings about inner transformation. If you read a lot of books, acquire a lot of knowledge, that knowledge is stored in the brain, and brain is a part of this body. So when I die, this brain will go along with it. So if you have memorized the Gita in this life, next life if you are born again, you'll have to memorize it again. You can't say I did it in the previous life. But if you have studied the Gita and made an effort to live according to it, you may not have succeeded fully. You may have failed 1,000,000 times. But even then, if you have made a sincere effort to live according to those teachings, and if you have succeeded, even say a weeny percent, say maybe 1%, you have succeeded in living according to it, that 1%, that experience, that transformation, that will not be destroyed with death. So even if I come back again, I will come with that change. So I don't lose that. So everything that is stored in the brain will be lost. But everything that will truly change my life will never be lost. And therefore, religion is a realization, means that I must live religion, not just read about it or talk about it. Sometimes we are very good at talking about religion. Sometimes we are very good at inspiring other people. But we'll have to see, are we able to inspire our own selves? Now, here is this example, for instance. If we believe that God exists, and God dwells in my heart, and God pervades the whole universe, we have to ask ourselves, is this belief that I have, or is this conviction that I have, how much of it has become truly a part of my life? When I see someone in front of me, do I know that that person is God Himself, or God in that form is in front of me? Oftentimes it doesn't happen that way. And one of the rules of life is that our perception of the world, our perception of others, is directly related to our perception of our own selves. So how we see others is directly related to how we see ourselves. And one common example, obviously, is that, for instance, now, it's very easy for every one of us to see ourselves as human beings. We don't need to refer to any books to know whether I'm a human being or not. It's very effortlessly we know that we are human beings. Now, because my knowledge of myself as a human being is so effortless, spontaneous, natural, I don't have any difficulty recognizing the person in front of me as a human being as well. Very natural, very spontaneous, no problem. But then we read in the books, well, God is our father, God is our mother, we are all children of God. Now, it's not so easy to see everyone as children of God. Why is it that that seeing the person in front of me as a child of God does not come to me as naturally as seeing that person as a human being? And the reason is, I'm not able to yet see myself as a child of God. So if I'm able to see myself as a child of God, and if that seeing myself becomes natural, spontaneous, effortless, then it'll be easy for me to see others as children of God as well. Sister Nivedita, she once mentioned, she had this profound realization. It's a very landmark realization in some way. She said she was in Mayavati, and so she said for the first time, I think it was Swami Swarupananda or someone, I don't remember exactly. So she said, suddenly she felt that she was in the presence of a mind. And I think that's great. So forget about the Atman or spirit, that's still very high. But the more I see myself primarily as a thinking being, not just a kind of just a body. So the more if myself as a thinking being becomes more real to me, then I see the person in front of me would be primarily as a thinking being. I will not think about it this way. When you meet someone, what is the first thing you look into that person? Like what clothes that person is wearing, how tall that person is, how well built that person is, or what? So again, what we look into others shows that what things we prioritize in our own lives. And so that realization that Nivedita mentioned is very profound, that sometimes the world of ideas, the world of concepts can become more real than this material world. And that's already an evolution. And sometimes you will see that people who live in the world of ideas and concepts, they are not so much obsessed with these material things. Because and the world of ideas is purer, clearer, more refined than this coarse, gross material world. And of course, if you raise your consciousness even further, that's when we come to the level of the spirit. So the more I'm able to see myself as a child of God, the easier it will become for me to see others as children of God. The more I'm able to see myself as a spirit, the easier it will become for me to see others as spirit. The more, why do I see selfishness in the world? Why do I see wickedness in the world? It's so easy to blame it on the world and say, oh, how terrible, everything has gone to the dogs. It's so easy to say that. But we need to, Swamiji's one I'm just kind of, so many ideas are coming, I'm just kind of rallying them out. One of the, a letter that Swamiji wrote to Goodwin, he begins by saying, we Vedantists must look at everything from the subjective standpoint. I think that's very important. Our normal tendency when we see something wrong is to say, why is it wrong? Why is it that way? But a Vedantic approach, a student of Vedanta would say, why am I seeing it that way? Does the world outside have an existence, an appearance independent of me? And what Vedanta teaches us is no. What we see outside is a reflection of what's going on inside. If there were no selfishness of any kind within me, I wouldn't be able to see any selfishness outside. There were no traces, no seeds of wickedness in my own heart, I would not be able to see wickedness outside. So the fact that I am seeing all these terrible things outside, I have to recognize that in some seed form, in some subtle form, they are in my own heart. And if I can remove them, if I can eliminate them, then the world will change for me. When Ramakrishna looked at this world, he saw nothing but the bliss of the Divine Mother. And then when we look at this world, we just see nothing but terrible people. We see just violence and killing and selfishness. And then sometimes we wonder, are we living in the same world? When you go, for instance, some of you have gone to Dakshineshwar, the Kali temple where Ramakrishna worshipped. So he looks at the deity on the altar and he says, I see the blissful, living Divine Mother. And the rest of us go and see there. It's beautiful, it's uplifting, it's inspiring, but nevertheless, it's still an image, a black stone image of the Mother. And you say, well, was Ramakrishna seeing something different? Weren't we seeing the same thing? So what made the difference? The difference was here. So if I can change the inside, then the outside will change for me. We should not make the mistake of thinking that the world outside is some static thing, and I'm just, if I'm able to see things clearly, I'm seeing things clearly. But probably not. One of the ways of greeting in northern India, and especially among the monastic communities, and in Hindi, sometime when they'll meet, the monks will meet and they'll ask each other, say, darshan saaf hai? Meaning, are you able to see things clearly? Now clearly they're not asking about how good your eyesight is. But what they mean is that, well, if I'm able to really see things, then I would not see human beings at all. I would just see the presence of the divine everywhere. So if I'm still seeing the world filled with human beings, it means I need to do some more work. I don't need to blame anyone for it. And so that's where true knowledge will come. A real learning should lead us to that stage. It's not about memorizing what the books say. It's not about impressing others with our knowledge, but it's about getting these ideas. You don't have to believe everything that the books say either. Don't believe anything blindly, but see with open eyes. Sometimes it is said, keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. So have some amount of filter to recognize what is it that you're looking for, what is it that you need. Accept only what makes sense. Don't accept just every little thing that anybody might say. But if it makes sense, if it is something that resonates with your head and heart, then have that courage to live according to it. I think that's where real knowledge begins. Not simply acknowledging something, yeah, this makes sense, I like it. It's not a question of liking anything. It's a question of, does it make sense? Do you believe? Does it somehow your heart and head makes you think it's right? Well, if it's right, then see that your life conforms to it. When my life will conform to it, there true knowledge comes. That is where learning begins. So as spiritual seekers, when we are trying to learn about life, learn about ourselves, some of these ideas might be of help. That knowledge is not to be found in books. Knowledge cannot be got through lectures and classes. And yet, all of these things are helpful, provided the information and the ideas that come to us through the books, through the classes, through the lectures, we're able to harvest it. We're able to make good use of it. And if we are able to make good use of it, then wonderful knowledge will sprout in the heart. When that knowledge comes, first thing that knowledge does, it brings us real humility. There is a saying in Sanskrit, Vidya dadati vinayam. Truly knowledgeable people are always humble. So if you find someone puffed up with knowledge and saying how much they know, then actually they know very little. There's one of the Upanishads, the Kena Upanishad says that one who says I know does not know. One who says I do not know knows. So there is a lot to think about these subjects. So as we continue our own spiritual journeys based on whatever we have learned, whatever we have been instructed according to our teachers, I pray that through the grace of Ramakrishna, Holy Mother and Swamiji, we may all attain to God and make our lives meaningful and fulfilling in this life itself. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, 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 peace.